This is Born and Raised, a podcast from the European Social Science Genetics Network. I'm Rafael and Aysu from the Department of Government, Uppsala University.
And I'm Aysu from the Department of Psychiatry in Amsterdam UMC.
It is cold and therefore dry. How do you feel with the dryness of this climate?
The dryness is not the main problem, I would say. The coldness is a different story, although I guess this is not that cold in Norwegian standards. If it was humid, it would be much worse in this temperature. So I'm fine with the dryness of the weather.
You're fine with the dryness, yeah. For context for the listener, we're in Norway.
We're in Oslo.
We're in Oslo recording, yes. I'm not drinking a soda.
And I'm not drinking a beer because it is Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And it would be a bit strange if we had started to drink soda and beer already.
I mean, soda, not so much. Beer, maybe. Yes. Yeah, I drink my coffee black, which does not vibe very well with having the refined taste buds of a 5-year-old. But
yeah,
do you typically take it black as well? Or
I do take black as well. But so I got this coffee from the coffee machine by pushing the special coffee button.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like normal coffee. I don't know what's special about it.
Yeah, mine is also special coffee. But it tastes like regular coffee.
Yeah, it's normal coffee.
Yeah, normal coffee. Who did we talk to for this episode?
We talked to Eivind Ystrøm.
Mm-hmm.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
I'm not the one to judge. I'm not Norwegian. I'm Norwegian adjacent, literally. Swedish, right? I would say Eivind Ystrøm too. So yeah, that sounds good to me.
Eivind Ystrøm, professor of psychology at the University of Oslo, who works mainly on genetics of personality.
And we get to learn both about what personality is, personality psychology, more broadly speaking. Also, we get to know a lot about the genetics of personality and what explains variation in personality.
We also learned a very interesting fun fact about Eivind.
It appears that he may have discovered in himself a unique genetic mutation that potentially could be associated with activism.
Indeed, although this could have made him a great activist, it was unfortunately wasted on Eivind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The environment that he was exposed to made sure that this genetic mutation did not express in that fashion.
Yes. What a shame.
This is clearly a gene-environment interaction of high importance to study. Stay tuned for that.
See you later.
See you later. Eivind Ystrøm.
Yes.
At Oslo University.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fairly well. I was just telling you about because of my high extroversion and my low neuroticism, I fell down 2.5 meters into concrete in my garage. But I have now the experience of having, this pelvic girdle pain that pregnant women have. So this has been, there's some divine justice going on.
Empathy enhancement.
Empathy enhancement.
Forced empathy.
Forced empathy, and also have 3 children. So there's some type of divine retribution.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about ESSGN and how you got into it, and how does it feel to be a personality psychologist living among social scientists? Yeah,
I'm by training, I'm a clinical psychologist. So I studied here at this university, in University of Oslo. And going into this, it is a bit strange because my personal story with this is that my biology teacher at high school was a creationist. So he said very clearly, I'm not going to talk about Darwin at all or anything like that. So, but I do remember this experience where I studied, first-year psychology. And behavior genetics is always a part of the curriculum. And I was walking to the student dorm and it was spring. And I saw these different birches and the trees that some of them were green and some didn't have leaves yet. And that was the eureka moment that I understood this about genetic variation, but also about adaptation. So I think then with behavior genetics and in psychology, there's always been this link between, Darwinism, right? That we have this variability in the population to be to benefit from different types of environment, and also that heredity is necessary for, any trait. So it is a bit weird starting point that I'm starting with the trait and not with the outcome that we study in social science. And just to show that, this morning I went and just looked at, this is my father's basic psychology book, which has been for decades, from 1962. And I saw that there's a whole chapter on behavior genetics. So it's called Hereditary Environment. It's a long chapter. And they even have, citations from mid-50s about DNA and such, some pictures of chromosomes. But there they go through the heritability of IQ and education. There's twin studies, there's adoption studies, and also a long part of it is about, as they call it here, the interaction of heredity and environment, where it's felt surprisingly modern to me. And here too, it's the other book I just looked up from the one I had. This is actually my wife's book because it looks much more red than the one I had. And there I see that, heredity is placed in the personality chapter with some nice pictures of monozygotic twins and such. So what do I mean by all of this is that going into the ESSGN as a personality psychologist, heredity has always been there in trait psychology. So we have to memorize the formula for heritability to pass the exam. Mm-hmm. So in a way, if the ESSGN was a science fiction movie, and this was a travel to this crazy new world about genetics, the personality psychologist is this hermit who's been stuck there for 65 years. Like, save me! I've been here for all this time. And then everybody on this spaceship, they bring these amazing methods and perspective, and maybe they, take you back home or something. I learned a lot. And also the way we talk about genetics in social science. Since we have worked with heredity for so long in personality, our concepts are not normative in the same way. So we study variability in, say, sensation seeking, right? So I have high extroversion. I fell down, almost killed myself there the other day. But we think that on average, across situations, it's good to be in the middle of the trait, right? Because that's where evolution has brought us. But when I go to the ESSGN conference, I think it's so fascinating to listen how the terms are so normative, how we talk about that more education is like a good thing or more money is a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's fundamentally different how we think about traits in psychology. So I'm also trying to just sit there and observe a bit and see where will this land? Yeah.
No, it is very interesting. Just the other day when we were talking to my colleague Sven Oskarsson, who's a political scientist, he started off, as listeners will have heard by now, he started off talking about this groundbreaking study in political science from 2005, which was basically just a very simple twin study of the heritability of political attitudes. Mm-hmm. That was huge news in the discipline that, there seems to be a heritability to this thing. And then you go back and you realize that there are twin studies from the 70s that looked at the heritability of political attitudes in behavior genetics and adjacent to personality psychology specifically. So it seems like you guys are old in the game in that sense.
Yeah, and I find that very fascinating. Even the review article summing up the Minnesota twins reared apart, published in Science in 1990, they're further down. Below that list, you have political attitudes, right? And the MC twins are correlated 0.5, those reared apart, and those reared together are correlated 0.5, right? And so it is interesting, but it still creates tension. So colleagues of mine over at sociology there I know that someone had left and gone to, work at the institute or somewhere else, because it's still... There's a certain line you cross when you go into genetics and try to explain, central variable they're working on or something. So that's also surprised me how toxic this still can get. Well, for me as a psychologist, it's like, where did all of these traits come from? Right? That's like it is this endogeneity problem, right? It has to be heritable to be here. right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting that different fields, different disciplines have different reactions to things turning out to be heritable. For example, in economics or in sociology, there was a much bigger reaction, I think, to the views, to the research looking into the genetics of those outcomes. Although I think very similar outcomes psychology had looked into already, and there was a history of findings and no such reaction. Like when political scientists were very surprised about things turning out to be partly heritable, it was already known in psychology, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good time to switch gears a little bit into what personality actually is. How do we measure it? And what do we know about the genetic influences going into personality?
Yeah. So, with personality, right, the word comes from Old Greek, meaning persona, right? So it means mask. The mask we put on, the mask we use also on stage to interact with other people, right?
So
it also has an interpersonal meaning in this sense, right? And there's different traditions. So the ones that you would be most familiar with would be in trait psychology about the big five. So two different traditions, finding all the adjectives that we can use in some creative way to describe humans. They semantically go together in like 5 factors, and you get this big 5 of like extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. But at the same time, we got computers. And then when we measure all of these, ask people about these adjectives, and you shove it into a computer and do this principal component analysis, you sort of get 5-ish, around 5 factors. And these are the same factors as the semantical ones. And so this has been quite sturdy. So this is the one that is most known. So to explain that, why is that useful? Well, in a way, it sort of creates a framework to explain dispositions for behavior across situations. Right? So situations will then explain most of behavior, but if you aggregate across lots of situations, then personality starts to matter. Right? So everybody can tell a joke at a party, but if you start aggregating over parties, then some of the extroverts, they are just, telling more jokes or something, or even like going to more parties, right? So then we can, in a pretty reliable way, predict behavior, but we can not predict it very strongly. Right? And just as a disclaimer here, in the field of personality psychology, there's also studies on identity, and there's also other parts of personality psychology, and also clinical personality psychology studying personality disorders and such. But this tradition in trait psychology with the big 5, it fits quite well with genetics. Because here we're trying to find some common factors that explains, behavior across many situations, right? So it should, in a way, be a bit similar if we tried to, explain behavior across many situations using genetics, right? We would, in one way, expect to find some common background factors that we all share that make certain behaviors more likely. So there has this link in that way. And also theoretically, we think that these are heritable traits with a moderate heritability. So, yeah.
So what do you mean by moderate heritability? What are the numbers? How heritable are personality traits?
Well, the thing is that they are not that heritable. So if we aggregate over time, over decades and such, then we see that it's still around 50%, often not more than that with this trait. If we even do across lifetime, we take a measurement there, maybe we can get a larger number. But if you take a single measurement, like what is your score on extroversion, for instance, like, today, and we use a variety of genetic methods, not only twins, but we use siblings and so on, then we are in maybe maximum like 40, in the 30s sometime. And so it appears that this is the great mystery in personality psychology, is that we can't explain this non-shared environment. Because if you put in all the stress factors and everything, they sort of quickly go away. People bounce back to the level they had in neuroticism or extroversion and so on. So there is this gloomy, as we call the gloomy prospect, that, there's all of these random factors that we profoundly don't understand. So in one way we should stop doing genetics and start studying this, because there we have no idea how that predicts behavior.
Are there any theories or ideas thrown out there about what that like non-shared environment actually more systematically consists of?
Yeah, so some have tried, and also a couple of studies I've done were related to personality disorders, where we at least ask monozygotic twins about their life experiences. So the discordance of life experiences, it can't be explained by, that they were sort of selected into a certain event, giving their genetic predisposition or their common upbringing. So there must be some type of non-shared environment, something that sort of happened to them some way that explain that they're different in this event that happened, right? And then we predict, for instance, then a personality disorder personality, and then we have limited success. So we can predict a bit. So I did this, for instance, for this well-known personality disorder, borderline personality. And to the criticism of personality psychologists, when you put just a bit of effort in there and do this on twins, it does actually, these stressful life events that are environmentally driven, it actually explains a bit of the variance, right? So the story is a bit that we can't do anything, but even like asking just 20 questions about really awful things, we can explain a bit. But when others have also tried to interview monozygotic twins, so Ken Kender, for instance, traveled around in Virginia, and then he took those who were discordant on depression, this was. And then this is more qualitative, and he finds these very dramatic life stories from one twin and the other, like one drove out the wrong way on the motorway and killed the family with her car while she was drunk. And she was the one that was always depressed, and the other wasn't, right?
Surprise!
Yeah, right. So there is, but there's far from enough effort to do this, and they've also tried to measure negative and positive affect just across minutes in twins, and it disappears. So there could be something about our mental state, right? That you think, who were you when we started? This podcast, maybe you're a bit excited. Now you're a bit more bored, So if I started, tracking this, so maybe that's what you're doing. It's how we are. We move fairly quickly like this.
Interesting. Right. So maybe there is also something to this idea of a large share of the non-shared environment being just stochastic variance.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And this randomness, we can say that for somebody who say we want to study certain outcomes, like things like I told you I fell down on a concrete floor, right? So that I don't do like every day. So if you started aggregating that on me, you wouldn't get very much out of it, right? So you have to like measure other types of stupid shit I do. Right? And then maybe you can say, oh yeah, he has, a slightly higher likelihood of breaking his bones.
We push you onto the concrete floor once every week for a year, and then we'll see how you feel.
Yeah, so this is the problem, I think, that maybe some of these really random things that happen, maybe it's a bit like in cancer research, that for many conditions of cancer, we know that something happened, right? But we can't pinpoint what it was. We can aggregate up lifestyle and toxins and all of this. We can explain a bit, and then we have genetics. But in the end, there is this stochastic that somebody said something to you while you were drunk out. You got a bit provoked, and you said something again, and the guy punched you, and you fell in the concrete, and something bad happened to you, right? But to pinpoint why the event happened, right? This awful event of that violence. Yes, it's a bit explained by personality and all that, but in the end, it's also a bit like cancer, right? It's a mystery.
Yeah, the world is a stochastic machine to a large extent.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of systematic variation, but a lot of it might just be things just happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
And but just to say a bit more about personality and genetics, so there is this Jivas, we hope soon will come out, that, I'm in some other part of Norway, I think very many others are. Are you
No, we're not.
Sorry. But there's like a long list of people. And there it's Ajivas or the Big Five. And it's done by Ted Schwaba. And it's pretty well conducted and it's quite pragmatic. Because finding the Big Five, like finding neuroticism, is like, as they say in Norwegian, like shooting on a barn door with a shotgun. Like you can't miss in personality. You have to find neuroticism, right? So but he still uses proper Big Five measures. And there he gets pretty good genetic prediction. It's not as strong as with education, but it's I can't remember the number, but it's pretty strong, right? And then he or the team that, did all this different type of analysis, they try out to look, well, let's look at siblings. They are different in their polygenic scores, and let's see if we control for that, for family background, then maybe the association with the phenotype with Big Five drops, because it maybe is about selection, social stratification, class, indirect genetic effects, parenting, right? We would think parenting influenced personality. Nothing. So, and this is what we believe in personality psychology, that it should be nothing. We do think that these traits are like that. There are like 40-50% heritable, but parents don't manipulate these larger traits such much. So it was also a verification of the theory behind Big Five, which is utterly boring, but really nice to see that at least it, follows the genetic data, which has not been the case for many other large Jivas, where it's often, oh, holy shit, what's going on here? We didn't expect this.
So does that mean that, there's presumably a correlation between parents and children in terms of their personality traits. So then does that mean that this is just happening through the genetics?
Good question. Also, at which age? So I'm just going to jump slightly into some of the things I'm studying to answer that question. So for me, getting into genetics, I actually started working with this MOBA study, but on personality. And then I was adopted away to the twin research group because my supervisor said, I can't teach you more methods and such. So it was like an adoption design there. And she placed me there in this other environment. And then they was a lot of parental investment, learning me twin methods and whatnot.
Yeah.
But later on, I started doing this finding who were like twins and families in this large sample to look at intergenerational transmission, right? So getting these larger families. And now a step after that, we have also genotyped them. So you have genotype trios, but you also have relatives. So these genotype trios. So we can look at how parents influence their children through an environment, how children influence their parents through an environment, and a paper that will now very soon come out in JCPP. We can also look at how siblings are influencing through each other through an environment when we use these trios. And so there, through a project I had a postdoc here that developed this method where we made something called a trio GCTA. So we just estimate, usually with GCTA, we would estimate all the effect, all the SNPs have on the phenotype, right? This is the maximum you can explain with these SNPs, right? These measurable common genetic variants. But since we have also done this in the parents, this means that all the other mothers in the sample are your pseudo-aunties in a way, right? And all the fathers are like your pseudo-uncles, and all the others are pseudo-siblings, right? So we can estimate all the effect parents have on their children through the environment. And the correlation between genetics and environment. So in this book from 1962, in the equation, waiting in the end there, they have the formula for a phenotype. This is G plus E and the covariance between G and E. We just ignore it because we don't have any good designs often to study it. Right? But here we have. And then we found that for some, when they tried it out, that, parents do make a difference. Right? So we tried it out for certain, you get large standard errors. But when we tried it out for like 8-year-olds, for instance, in like how depressive they are, right? Or ADHD symptoms and so on, hyperactivity, there we found pretty large effects of the parents. This could be because of assortative mating. It could be because of, other type of selection factors. But the effects were large, right? And they were sometimes both negative and positive correlated with the genetic effect of the child. So the gene-environment correlation could be both positive and negative depending on the phenotype. So what I'm getting at here is that we have for a long time, say, for instance, study personality, we said, parents matter, but they don't make a difference, as Robert Plumman says, right? And we sort of believe this. I was socialized to believe this, but I'm a very sort of defiant contrary person, like, posing as like an agreeable person.
Right.
So like, we have to, this can't stand. We have to, because I have 3 children, this, they obviously piss me off, and I can see their sibling with each other. With my one daughter is sad, and then bring in the extroverted sister. I can see her positive affect rises within a minute, right? You can just see it in front of your eyes, these indirect genetic effects, right? So this we have to study. And so that's been some of the motivation to sort of try to find these effects. And from this long monologue I had here now, the point is, when we use genetics on the parents, we know it's entirely environmental, right? Right? So it's something in the environment. It's the parents' genes, but it's affected through the environment or selection, right? But it's not the kids' sort of direct genetic effect. This means that it's back to the gloomy prospect. We see that parents make a difference from their heritable traits, but we don't know what they do. Because we've tried to measure it in different ways, right? We tried in these children of twin designs, we tried to let's put in personality in the parents. Sometimes people, for some weird reason, they put in the same phenotype in the parents as they're studying in the child, which we very often do. And that is also a bit weird, right? If you were studying other species, if you were studying birds, maybe in the parents you would study how good nest they're making, right? For the survival of the chicks. You wouldn't study like flying in both the parents and the chicks. Maybe you would. But very often we would study that parenting is another phenotype. It promotes the survival of your offspring, right? So this is also fascinating that you often study the same thing, and maybe that's why we haven't found anything.
I guess the assumption must have been that most of it is through like observational learning or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's just because you have to, that's one assumption. And I think it's also the fuzziness of our brains, that we somehow have 2 things and they just stand close together in our brain and we sort of take the closest thing. So we take like education to education or something. So we have this preprint now that a PhD student of mine did, where we used the GeoGCTA and how on educational performance, how they do on these national tests, and then also their GPA. And there we found a positive gene-environment correlations, as we often find in education. We find, well, large direct genetic effects, but also this large effect of parents, right? But the question is, the gene-environment correlation is often around 0.2, right? So it means that this genetic effect of the parents, it's like 20%, well, something about education. Or maybe, who knows, 30, 40. But in all cases, most of it is loving their children, caring for them. God knows what they're up to, right? And this excites me because, well, I'm interested in feelings. I'm interested in why people love each other, right? Why are people sad, right? Why are people afraid? Why do people do stupid shit, right? I think that's also to do these studies that fits with my idea about parenting, that we have to broaden our focus about the number of human traits that we use to sort of promote the outcomes of our offsprings. And there I think genetics show that we need genetics to do these studies, right? They can't be done in any other way, right? So that's, I think, is sort of profoundly interesting, right? We can use relatives for much of the other stuff, but for this design, we have to have genetic information to get the knowledge.
So parents matter, but does the effect of parenting persist throughout the lifetime? So is it possible that, for example, parenting matters in the child outcomes, but those outcomes don't stay the way they are when the children grow up? So I'm trying to explain the discrepancy, I guess, between what you find in the personality GWAS, where you don't find any effect of parenting, parents' genes through the environment, compared to what you find with that trio GCTA design, where you do find an effect.
So I do think age matters, right? And that also with the big 5 in the GWAS, it is a bit like predicting height, right? We do think that these are sort of global large traits, and God knows what we found if we took something much closer to behavior, right? So about characteristic sort of adaptation of neuroticism, right? How you problem solve an insult, for instance, right? And how do you internally solve this insult that somebody just, punched you in the face with, right? That may be, who knows? I'm not betting as much on the parents anyway after this age. Well, I think that one thing that we found is that when we are looking, we have to study many more phenotypes. But those few we've done up to now, first we freaked out by this result, and then especially Espen Eilertsen here and such, and sort of read up on animal literature and plant literature and such. And in this, where they do this type of selections, this negative gene-environment correlation, when you select, is quite common. Because if you have a negative gene-environment correlation, but you still have an actual effect of, say, the mother here is either here they study like milk yield, for instance, right? And with this negative correlation, your heritability in the sense of direct genetic effect, it goes down, right? When you don't study the parents. Up to the point where in principle, you can get zero heritability. So when we studied some of these phenotypes that is related to regulating your behavior and your emotions, there we find negative gene-environment correlation, right? And we have to study it more. There's lots of uncertainty. We find it positive in education, but we find it negative there. But often in these SNP-based studies that's done before, they find these minuscule, surprising low SNP heritabilities for these early behavioral phenotypes like externalizing, internalizing, and such. So here we find this negative, and then the direct genetic effect goes up because of this. And so that's interesting. You need that, and then you get better genetic prediction in a way. Okay, good, interesting. But what does it all mean? Right? What does it all mean? Well, it would also then mean that, we would make sure our children survives for a certain amount of time. So they're in like this embryo stage, right?
Yeah.
So here we imagine like Adam and Eve, something like, when we sort
in
of
creation scenario.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
We started, with generation zero. So we started doing parenting. We just invented parenting, right? So we have some heritable traits. They have some traits which makes them do stupid shit. So we call it's the sum of all of those alleles there that goes together to makes them, die young. And then we call that a trait. We just label it as, doing stupid shit.
Yep.
And then you have the parent also has a trait. It's called stopping your kid from doing stupid shit, right? And in generation zero, these two are zero correlated.
Yeah.
They're just, right? And then you loop forward thousands of generations.
Yeah, you're going to have
a collider stratification bias, because the genes, we are just a vessel. They don't give a shit that we're dead or alive. They just want to reproduce. You get quickly, since they are selected on the same event, dying or something like that, you get a negative correlation. And back to this was like bit like my bio teacher being a creationist. I sort of felt, having studied psychology, why didn't anybody tell me this? I felt cheated. It's a bit like they call it anagnorisis in Greek tragedies, when King Oedipus tears out his eyes. It's a bit like that. Because for me, that was a profound insight that we would expect for parental behaviors that regulate behavior, back to what Cattell called the biopsychosocial norm, right? It's not regression towards the mean, but it's pushing the individual back to the population mean, right? There, we would actually expect a negative gene-environment correlation, and that this would suppress heritability.
Right.
So I think this is, in theory, we should see them. So I think we should do more of this type of studies because, it tells us something about human nature. Right?
Yeah, it sure does. That's true.
Yeah.
I know you've also been, at least in the last few years, quite involved in doing research on not just gene-environment correlation, but also gene-environment interaction.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you could tell us about specifically personality and gene-environment interactions?
Yeah. I find that in all textbooks, even the one from 1962, there was a large part of the chapter was the interaction between heredity and environment. And in all psychological theory, they have different terms for this. So they call it, this parent-offspring, parent-child interactions in different ways. You all have these terms, and we all teach our students about it. And we have utterly bad science on it. So that's a big motivation. The other thing that, in one way, we would think that it would make sense that we have this, right? So it makes sense that, as our parenting example earlier, that I am ready to protect my child in a bit, and I'm sort of prepared at this above genetic recombination. I have an alertness for genetic recombination. They can be basically any kid in the population, right? So I have to have like a palette of different type of things that I can do, right? And so there's different terms for this. In education, sometimes called like a scar row type of interaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in psychology, in developmental psychology, we have Thomas and Chess, who have this goodness of fit, right? So an idea about that with a certain temperament of the child and a certain personality of the parent, you would observe an interaction, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the motivating things to do this is that up to now, it's been just awful to study, and right? But we studied it anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So like every 20 years or something, there comes this wave of G by E studies, like the Purcell model in like the early 2000s. And at some point, people are like, oh, okay, we have to stop now. And then, so it goes up and down. And now there's like a new wave. But I think maybe this is the wave, or maybe this, this will be another, faulty way. And the reason is that we can separate, G from E, right? Mm-hmm. Because, for instance, we have siblings, we have genotype trios and such. So we can have a genetic effect that we know is exogenous from the child,
yes.
Right? So I think that has a lot of promise. So we've done some studies starting up by just letting, these polygenic scores be random over schools and neighborhoods and such. These type of things, right? Just to demonstrate that there is a significant variability, just observed, right? Like something to study further. And other things that we've known for a long time, a PhD student here, Ralf Borneso, is studying, is that we assume that if there's an interaction, if you think back, like the basic stat scores, if there's an on-model interaction, the variance on your residual should increase on the level of your explanatory variable, right?
Yeah.
And, your explanatory variable in the GWAS is a SNP. So this means that the variance, if there's a G by E, should expand over the SNPs. And up to now, this could mean anything. But when we now can separate G from E, we can also do GWAS on gene-environment interactions. And this I found very fascinating because, as I showed here in this book from 1962, for many of the traits, and also even Darwin said that expected, that heredity would be the norm rather than the exception or something, right? Some type of term like that. Is that if we do GWAS on G by E, we can't a priori expect what to find, right? So these genetic variants, to see what type of functions, what type of traits, what is it in the parents, for instance, right? Or in the child that makes them sort of have a lesser outcome or a better outcome given a certain environment. And there we need the genetic information. So I think we learn something that we couldn't have learned before from, in 1962.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting also for me because I was talking to a journalist about personality genetics a couple of months ago, and she asked me, what do we know about gene-environment interactions in personality? And like ahead of time, I looked into it and I realized there is so little known on gene-environment interactions on personality. I mean, she asked me why. I figured it's probably because GWAS on personality kind of lagged behind other phenotypes. So until now, like this big GWAS, and there was another GWAS in the Million Veterans project right before, I guess, like a couple of years ago. There hasn't been any really like large-scale, well-powered GWAS on personality, limiting the use of polygenic scores. The polygenic scores didn't predict that much personality traits. Only some traits like neuroticism received more attention than the others because those were more predictive. So in that sense, do you expect us to find out much more about gene-environment interactions in personality with this new GWAS coming out?
I hope so. We are sending in some abstracts and such for these conferences, like the ESSGN conference that you should all go to, and then also the BGA conference. So even I am, because now we have this unique opportunity in history. So of course you have to study it, use Big Five personality and try to study it. To be realistic, I mean, often we don't find anything. But of course, I would have to optimistic that we find something. But I think my job is to falsify that maybe, all these assumptions have been wrong in a way, right? But I think that I started looking a bit into it and such, and there is something there. So let's see. I mean, the most important, I think, is we find nothing with this large GWAS. All of these textbooks in psychology that they should be there about goodness of fit, for instance, should be revised. In a bit in the same way, when we've done this for education, in different way, often we find the opposite interaction pattern than we find what Scaro expected, right? So we find a compensation model instead, right?
Yeah.
So I think that at least rather than finding nothing, we find that it wasn't plus, it was minus. So maybe that could be the case too, that yes, Thomas and Chess was right, they just was opposite of what they expected, right? But I know that what we can do in addition is, what if the traits that we inhibit to do this magic in the environment, what if they are different traits that we use to sort of, have a certain behavioral pattern over time, right? So in these large G-vases, we are fighting against G by E, right? So we're finding these genetic variants that triumph across environments and populations and everywhere. So if we find something, then we find, well, it's an interaction related to those traits. And that's good, because that's maybe most close to those we are studying theoretically in personality psychology. That would be interesting. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing there. There could still be traits, heritable traits, that is used for coping, right? Or for resilience.
Yeah.
So you exhibit them under stress. You exhibit them under a changed environment. You exhibit it when your colleague made a snarky remark and you're trying very hard to not be provoked, right?
Or when you fell on the concrete floor in your garage.
Yes. Right, so maybe those are different traits or just partially correlated. So I think we have to do both. We have to really go all in on the big five, test it out and see if it's that stuff, but also keep doing GWAS, right? And see if maybe these traits that we exhibit under stress are of a slightly different flavor than when we capture using these things that we always carry with us across all situations.
Great. So, Eivind Ystrøm, if you could bring only one thing to a deserted island, what would it be?
Anything.
But it's one thing.
One thing. My father died when I was 10, and I wouldn't bring anybody else to the deserted island because then, they wouldn't be here to live their life. So I think I would have brought my father to the deserted island in person and to talk to him.
That's a very heartwarming answer. Yeah. Nice.
So, do you read fiction?
A bit. Science has been awful to me. So early in life I read a lot, and then but I still do. But I hope when my kids are grown and I'm a lazy old professor that I'll start reading much more again. Quite a bit, yes.
So do you have a favorite fiction book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so I would recommend Sjenanse og verdighet by Dag Solstad. It's translated into English and several languages. So it's called Shyness and Dignity by Dag Solstad. So it's about a teacher who has mental breakdown when he tries to teach Ibsen to 18-year-olds. And he understands that he wasted his life because their brains are just not mature enough, to understand Ibsen. But and then he goes back through his whole life and then up to this humiliating point, right? So it's a deep dive into shyness and dignity, but not so much dignity actually. It's mostly shyness and dignity.
Indignity. Yeah. Is there anything that you can share that might be a little bit peculiar or a bit interesting that people might not know about it, or fun? A fun.
Well, I don't know if it's fun or anything like that, but it's related to genetics, and it's about we talked about gene environment interactions, and this is what we call the road not taken. What could you have been? And when I did military service, we all had to be gassed with tear gas. So they put us into a gas chamber and they threw tear gas in, and then we were like, and it turned out that I was entirely immune.
Whoa.
So I was like the second to take off my gas mask, and then after a while I started showing off, inhaling in the raw, blowing out another nostril. It turns out to be cancerous or something later, right? And I just waited there, and they kicked me out of the gas chamber. And so this means that I could have had this awesome career as a rioter. So imagine me, right? I
Right.
could have been the best rioter, right? I could just have thrown,
Did you have any activist years when you were
No.
younger? No?
No,
Nothing?
No.
You wasted this?
I wasted this. So this is something about genetics, this rare mutation.
But
It does exist in 1 in 10,000 or something.
Mhm.
Because we heard the officers had seen it before,
Mm.
this rare mutation. And but with gene-environment interactions, it's just if you take the wrong term,
Mm.
it's just wasted.
Yeah, I mean, together with your extraversion, this would have been an excellent...
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I could be a circus artist,
Yeah, circus artist.
or reality TV or whatever.
Yeah. Do we know the precise location of this genetic mutation?
No,
No.
I feel that it was sufficient for me that the officer heard about it,
Mm.
and then I don't want to read into it because maybe there's some fact checking that.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'd
Never
rather
check a
just
good
keep
story.
the story as it is.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty interesting.
It's a fascinating fact.
Never heard of such a type of immunity before.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard of many
So we can,
immunities. But
at the next ESSGM, we see if we can get into a bit of trouble, and then we can, try it out.
let's hope we can avoid the tear gas at conferences. But you never
Some
know.
very angry sociologist or something.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. All right, cool. Eivind, thank you very much for participating.
Well, thank you for having
the
me.
Born and Raised podcast. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, well, likewise.
Pleasure.
Yeah.